Creators Institute, and we're going to be talking about fiction chapter and book conclusions. We're going to start with chapters just because, it makes sense. And then we're going to go into the book endings. So when you're writing fiction, it can be kind of hard to decide how and when you're going to end a chapter. A lot of the times people think that you should end on a cliffhanger, but that isn't always the case. And in fact, it's usually not the case. It's ending on a cliffhanger is great sometimes, and it does help push the reader forward. But doing it well is extremely difficult, and your reader will start to pick up on, the expectation of a cliffhanger the more you use it. So in general, it's best to save cliffhangers for when you really, really need them, and to go with something else for the rest of your chapters. But what does that leave when you're actually writing the rest of your chapters? So there are a couple of things that you can do to end a chapter in a satisfying way to keep your reader moving forward. Some good things you can do are end with introducing a new character. Maybe at the beginning of the book, your main character is just starting their whatever kind of journey that they're on, and they meet someone new at the end of a chapter. That'll keep the reader going. It isn't really a cliffhanger. It's more of a foreshadowing and an introduction. You could also ask a question. What's your main character thinking about? What are they trying to figure out? Things along those lines. You can also end with your character revealing something important about either themselves, the plot, the world, a number of things. Revealing something creates intrigue, and it helps the reader really get into what you're trying to tell them. Or you could show that they've grown in a particular way. So maybe at the beginning of a chapter, your main character is really headstrong about something, maybe about how they conduct, decision making. Maybe there's someone that really goes with their gut. And then throughout the chapter, they do that and they kind of learn, oh, maybe I should think about something, or maybe I am making decisions too quickly. By the end, they can make that revelation and say, oh, okay, maybe for this next thing, I should think about it a little bit more. And that can go, any kind of way. The long and short of it is, though, your chapter ending should be logical to what your actual chapter is. So you want to make sure your ending matches the tone, the mood, everything that you have already put into your chapter. The ending should be a logical conclusion to that chapter. So, for example, you wouldn't, at the end of a very long action sequence, a chapter where, the plot is happening very much so. A lot of plot, elements are getting ticked off as you're going through the chapter. At the end of that, it doesn't really make sense for the main character to still be raring to go, right? They would probably be very exhausted. So adding in a quieter ending, a little rest for them. Maybe they're ending on a revelation of, wow, that was a lot. Maybe I need to take a step back and actually figure some more things out before I go in again. Just really matching your ending to your chapter on the whole will make the satisfying ending that your reader is looking for, and will help them, kind of understand the characters better, understand the plot a little bit better, and really help them push forward throughout your book. As for when to end a chapter, that really depends on a couple of things. Firstly, if it's getting too long, if it's just a really meaty chapter, it's usually too long, quite frankly. Some chapters can be on the long side if a lot's going on, if there's a lot of character interaction, character development, or plot moving forward. There can be longer chapters, but in general, you want to keep your chapters around 2,500 to 3,500, and that's kind of on the long side. The longer it gets, the harder it is for the reader to see an ending in sight. And it can kind of you know, get them to slow down a little bit, get them to kind of question, like, why are we spending so much time on this? And, things like that. So consider the length when you are ending a chapter. Next, if you find yourself like repeating yourself a lot, if you find yourself using the same ideas over and over again, it's probably time to stop, because that probably means that you're out of things to say about the particular, chapter that you're writing. And then lastly, a good point to end is actually when there's a shift of some kind. So that could be a shift in location, a shift in a point of view, a shift in time period. All of those are good indications that you should be changing into a new chapter. You don't want to start mixing up places and people and time periods all in one chapter. Sometimes it works if you're splitting things up into sections, but more often than not, it's good to just clean cut, start a new chapter, and start from that new point. So those are kind of the chapter endings, how to do it, when to do it, and we do have two documents actually, how to end fiction chapters and how to end fiction books. So those are both resources for you to use as well. Ending a book is similar but different in a lot of respects. So when you're ending a book, you want to try to avoid ending on any kind of introduction. Ending on an introduction often leaves the reader feeling really unsatisfied, because you should have been doing that work throughout the entire book. Throwing in a new character right at the last second, adding in a new plot point right at the very end. Those are kinds of things that the reader is going to go, why wasn't this talked about earlier? Why am I just learning about it now? And any ending you try to give those things will end up being unsatisfying, purely because you haven't dedicated the time to explore those things fully and really come up with good endings for them. So try to avoid introducing anybody, anything right at the very end. By your last chapter, everything should be, fully ready to be tied up. Ending on cliched twists is also a big avoid. Not to say that you can't end on a twist, and not to say that ending on a twist is like a bad thing. It's not. But do avoid the big cliched ones if you can. So those are things like, I woke up and it was all a dream, or he was actually dead the whole time. Things like that. The ones that get readers going, oh, okay, so I didn't really need to be invested. It ended up where a lot of things end up. So if you are going to do a twist, make sure that it is logical to your story and it is needed for your story. If it isn't needed, I recommend not really putting in a twist. If it's just for shock value, your reader is going to pick up on that, and they're going to be a little cranky. So if you want a twist, make sure it is planned, make sure that it is logical to the rest of your book, and make sure that it is done in a way that makes your reader feel genuinely surprised and not just thrown into a new situation for no reason. Some good things to do to have a really solid book ending are to make sure it's satisfying, surprising, and show change from the beginning of your book. And that change could be from the main character, could be from the plot, the world, just some indication that things are different at the end than they were at the beginning. These all kind of work together to make a satisfying ending for your reader. Things like tying up loose ends, giving your reader something to think about, and really showing that change from beginning to end. Those are all good things that the reader will be happy to read by the end. They'll feel like, okay, yes, I read through this book. It was worth my time. I feel like things are different for this world now. I feel like things are somewhat tied up. You don't have to tie up everything. There are different kinds of resolutions that you can find in the fiction book conclusions document. There's a bunch of different types that you can kind of look through and see which one's best for your book. But a general sense of like finality is something that your reader is going to want. So those are all things that you can keep in mind to write a really solid book ending. If you're ever stuck for any kind of conclusions for your chapters, your book. Like I said, we do have those documents, how to conclude a fiction chapter and how to conclude a fiction book. And if you're really, really stuck, you can ask your editor. They are happy to help you figure out how to end something and what's going to be a really satisfying end for your reader. But most importantly, what you should do as a writer is read a lot. Read things in your genre, outside of your genre. And when you're reading in your genre, make sure you're taking note of things like, well, how does this chapter end? How do, science fiction books end their chapters? How do fantasy books end their, books as a whole? Really be paying attention to those things when you're reading, and read a lot. Good writers read often, and use everything that you read as a learning tool. There's always something you can learn from, reading a book. So really use those things to your advantage. And if you're looking for examples, there are plenty in our documents, as well as your editor. They can give you as many recommendations as they can. But that should be it for fiction conclusions. So good luck and happy writing.